Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animation not made by the mouse. I'm your host, Octaviano, and today I'll be talking about the biggest animated feature of the last year. That already kind of gives it away, but for those of you who somehow don't know what it is, it's the movie adaptation of the beloved video game Super Mario Bros. Before we get started, I just want to say, if you're listening to this on YouTube, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, feel free to comment, and ring the bell for notifications. Also, if you're on Spotify or just any other podcast site, follow this show on those platforms. Back to the show. So in many ways, this was one of the most anticipated movies in recent memory. There were some people who doubted it, but for me, the second I saw that first trailer, I was like, yeah, this one, it's going to be one of the biggest movies of the year. I already knew it was going to be $1 billion hit. Just looking at it, the trailers are really well done. The voice cast is top notch. They got something here. Like, maybe it's not even all that great, but they definitely nailed what needed to be nailed for this to work. Because, and just to be upfront, I do enjoy the live action Super Mario Bros. Movie, but it is a weird beast. It is something that is completely wrong to the video game adaptation. And to be fair, if you look into the history, there's actually kind of a reason why. But it is something that, for many reasons, is not very well beloved by a lot of people. And understandably, I don't think it's wrong for people to not like anything, really. But I don't think it's wrong for them to not like this movie specifically because it's, very unfaithful to the video games. Even if I think it's a bit overblown to go that far with it, just considering that by the time it came out, there was not that many games to work with, and the games themselves weren't very story heavy. So just on that front alone, it made sense for people to be excited to see this again. Like, okay, this is the second attempt to do a Mario movie, and this time they're gonna get it right. And for the most part, I think this one is better. I do get the argument that the original one is much more interesting. I do get the argument that this movie doesn't have a whole lot of substance to it. But as a Mario fan, as a fan of this world, I get the appeal to this one much more. And it's much easier to grasp, even if you don't know anything about Mario, just because it's a very simple fairy tale versus the original movie that they did, which was a satire on like politics and corporations and whatnot. And I mean, realistically, even if you take a look at all the things that it's trying to do, I don't think it ever fully delivers on all those aspects. So while it is more interesting, it's still very messy versus this movie where it's like, yeah, it's not trying to do much, but it's kind of doing everything it wants to do well. But again, I do understand people's fascination with it. I mean, again, I am a fan of that original movie, regardless of it not being the greatest thing ever. But yeah, so now we have this, and then of course there's the people who believe in the whole video game curse. I used to believe in that kind of thing. I don't believe in it anymore just because I'm like, look, there's been a lot of good video game movies. And again, going back to the one that people often cite as like the start of the video game curse, even though it's not even, as far as I know, it's not even the first video game movie, I don't think. It wasn't even bad. But, realistically, when it comes to the whole video game curse thing, it doesn't make sense because some people extend it to shows, and I'm like, well, we've had good video game shows even before all this. I mean, we've had, like, some good Sonic the Hedgehog shows. The Pokemon anime is very well beloved. Movie-wise, you had Detective Pikachu, which I still think is pretty much the gold standard of these things. So, I don't know. I just don't really believe in it, and I don't really care. But, putting all that, I do think that, yeah, the Super Mario Bros. Movie, very solid, and I get how it got to the $1 billion mark. Even if it's not even the best animated movie that I've seen in recent memory, it wasn't the best animated film of last year, but I do get how it was such a big crowd pleaser. I mean, it is based on such a beloved franchise, and it kind of delivers on a lot of fronts. It's rewatching it, I'm like, yeah, it's not the best, but it's so easy and engaging to watch, especially as a fan. Like, I will admit that there is some bias there from me because, yeah, I'm literally like, hey, that's the thing I remember, that's the thing I like. But I don't think the movie coasts by on just doing references. I feel like that part of it is a bit overblown when it comes to people arguing that. I feel like, no, this movie does have a legit, solid core to it. It is very simple, but some movies are. If I'm completely honest, one of the things that I often say about this movie is that I feel like it's the closest we've had to a modern version of a Walt Disney era animated feature. In that it's a very simple fairy tale story. It's basically, like the characters themselves carry a lot of the entertainment of it. So if you don't like the characters, you probably won't like the movie. But for me, that's all I really need. And sure, it doesn't go deep into the characters and their emotional struggles, but neither did a lot of the classic Disney films, if you really look at it. You'd have the characters and scenarios, things just kind of happen, and then we'd have a climax. And that's kind of where it is here. Only difference is that, at least with this, there's a little bit more of a structure, and you could see where they could have added a bit more to it. But, I don't know, I feel like one of the arguments that I've often had when people bring up, like, oh, okay, you could have added an extra 10 to 15 minutes to this movie, it's like, yeah, you could have, but then there's a lot of movies that where you do add in that much that are pretty simple stories to them, and like often animated, and it ends up kind of backfiring. Like, it ends up not being as good as you originally expected it to be. I feel like maybe this movie could have been better if you added in those extra minutes. I definitely am not ruling that out, but you do risk that it could have been worse. Like, it could have dragged on, because it's like, yeah, sometimes some of these stories work best if you just let it play out the way it plays out. But for what it's worth, I mean, I don't, at least the initial watching, and even when I'm not thinking too much on it, I don't feel like the movie rushes as badly as some people say it does. I do, realize that once I start thinking about it, once the movie's over and I start realizing, like, hey, this scene just kind of went by, but as I'm watching it, it's like, no, it's in a nice adjustable pace that goes along just perfectly fine. I don't overthink it too much, because again, it really does feel like something that would be just a simple fairy tale, like something that you would tell your kids during their bedtime stories. And that's where the movie excels at the most for me, because it really does get that feeling of like, okay, this is a kid's story, this is a fairy tale with characters being in, like, for the most part, it's like, okay, yeah, the main characters aren't in modern day, but when they get transported into the Mushroom Kingdom, while they are weirded out by it, it's not like they try to do like weird references to, like, modern day pop culture or anything like that. Like, it's very much within the universe, and it doesn't take long for them to kind of just adjust and just be like, okay, look, this is the world I'm in. I'm not gonna start questioning every single little thing unless I have no understanding of it. Like, yeah, Mario gets confused by talking apes, but it's not like he spends 5 minutes on it. Like, he's just like, oh, there's an ape that's, wearing clothes and he's talking. Okay. So it provides that nice little, realism to it, but without it going overboard. Like, it doesn't turn into this whole fish out of water thing, which I think is fine. Sometimes that stuff works. Sometimes it's best to leave that behind. I think for the tone of this movie, where it's just a simple children's story, I don't think you need it. You just really need to have the character's initial surprise, and then them just going along and realizing, like, okay, well, that's not even the point of the story. The point of the story is, I gotta go rescue my brother from this evil dragon who's also an evil king who wants to marry the princess. Which, again, that's the kind of story we're getting. It's a very simple children's story, something that you would get your kids to sleep on, but for all the right reasons. It's very lightweight, and I don't think that's a negative thing. Like I said, for me, it's very much a classic Walt story. I say that as if Walt Disney created the fairy tale, but when it comes to animation, I think that's where most people kind of look at it. Like, not that I want to make this about bashing Walt Disney's company's work and whatnot, but it does really highlight where they failed with their 100th anniversary feature, where they tried doing a fairy tale, but they added all these rules to the world. Pretty much the whole magic and everything just got so complex that with the short running time that movie had, it became more confusing, and it just made you question, like, okay, well, if they could do this, why couldn't they do that and whatnot? Whereas with this movie, yeah, there's a few instances where it's like, okay, well, why didn't he do this or that? Like, a big part of the plot is that Bowser wants to get married to Peach, and if she doesn't, then he'll use the the power star that he's gotten at the start of the movie to basically destroy the Mushroom Kingdom, and you kind of question like, well, why didn't he do that? And it's like, well, he was kind of trapped at the moment when it happened, and by the time he got loose to use it, it was in a different area, and chances are, given the character, he probably was high and mighty to think that he needed it to defeat Mario, which maybe it's stupid, but I'm like, yeah, you know what? Again, very simple story. I can get by it. Maybe they could have changed a few things here and there to make it make more sense why it leads to that. But I personally don't mind. I just feel like with this, a lot of it goes with vibes, which again, you don't get with Disney's 100th anniversary movie, where it's like, yeah, no, why didn't the villain use his magic to do this or that? Especially because they make a point of like acknowledging these things. I'm not saying the name of the movie just because I'm like, one, I've already talked about it before, and two, I just don't want to acknowledge it too much in this video about Super Mario Bros. Like I said, the whole plot is pretty much just Mario and Luigi start off as plumbers. They get transported into the Mushroom Kingdom. Luigi gets separated and he gets captured by Bowser. Mario wants to rescue him. Mario teams up with Princess Peach, so it's kind of the plot of the game, but they changed it up a bit just because, like, hey, Princess Peach is always getting captured, so let's try to make her more involved with the story. I do think that it kind of hurts with Luigi just because it makes his character reduced to just something that they need to get, which is weird for a movie called Super Mario Bros. Movie. But at the same time, I was like, look, at the very least, he still has some fun moments, and when the ending comes, he still gets this big shining moment. So I won't take away 20 points for that, but I do think that, yeah, it would have been nice if they had given him a little bit more to do. I often think while watching this movie is like, okay, I don't want to add too much because like I said before, it could ruin it. But at the same time, I do kind of think like maybe we could have gotten a few scenes back to Luigi where maybe he was crafting like a breakout with the other characters, or done something to show like, okay, maybe the other characters start seeing something in him that he doesn't, and it probably would have worked better. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen, but for what it's worth, I think it would have been a nice way to go about it. But then again, like I said before, maybe it just would have ruined the flow of the story. And again, for what it's worth, I still like the performance. Charlie Day is great as Luigi. Voice acting wise, the king in this is definitely Bowser. Jack Black is just incredible. He gets his incredible musical number, which I still think should have been nominated for an Oscar. I don't care if Peaches is a joke. It's such a good joke, and it wouldn't be the worst or even silliest song that the Oscars has ever nominated. Realistically, there's a lot of good voice work in this. Toad by Keegan-Michael Key, great performance. I love Kamek, voiced by Kevin McRitchson, who is an actual voice actor. Would love if more voice actors got their dues, but as I've said in the past, I mean, technically speaking, there's a lot of actors now that technically qualify as voice actors, even though they've been in big things, so it feels like it's kind of blending a little bit more. Chris Pratt, who a lot of people were worried about, actually does a pretty good job as Mario. I know a lot of people prefer the high-pitched Wahoo version, but for me, I don't know. I think that when it comes to doing stories like this, I prefer a deeper voice Mario. In fact, I prefer like the Super Mario Super Show version where it was Captain Lou Albano. The weak link in terms of the voice really for me is Anya Taylor-Joy, who I don't even think is bad. It's just that whereas the other characters get some really interesting moments, for the most part, she's just there to kind of support Mario and explain certain things. Yeah, there's some really cool moments with her, but it's mostly in terms of the visuals, not so much the voice acting performance. So if anything, I do hope that the sequel gives her some really great lines to work on. Because yeah, I can't think of too much that was really funny with that character or really interesting. The nicest it gets to is when she tries explaining how there's more galaxies out there, which is kind of a nod to Mario Galaxy. I kind of wish that they would have expanded on that scene if they were to make it longer, but they didn't. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't like I said. I don't think she's even horrible, and she's not bad. She's good. It's just that there's not really much for her to chew on, like the other characters where their the voice performance is given something to really shine on alongside the visual. I do think a lot of the great stuff in this movie is Bowser himself, just because while the games have had Bowser wanting Peach for a while, I think this is the one that fully cemented it in a lot of audiences' minds. And like, yeah, that's his whole goal because there's a lot of jokes in there for it. I do love how Kamek tries to hype him up, by basically being like, oh yeah, this is what the princess will like. Use this quote, pretty much reenacting like, okay, this is how the princess is gonna be like when you come in and propose to her, and that kind of stuff. And there's the whole wedding, which is very fun scene, especially because you get a lot of little cameos there. If you're a Mario fan, if not, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's just neat to see all these things. One thing that Illumination really excels at, by the way, I just realized this is the first Illumination movie I've actually ever talked about on this show. I've previously talked about on the topic of Illumination on the show, saying that I wasn't really too interested in them. And to be fair, I do think a lot of their movies are still kind of just okay or not really all that good. But I do see this as, okay, maybe they are changing a little bit. And maybe I was a bit too rough on them before, because it's like, yeah, maybe they're not always making very unique or standout movies, but as a company, they seem to be one of the nicest ones to their employees. So maybe I should treat them a little bit better. But with this movie, I will say one of the nicest things that I can say about Illumination is how they put a lot of detail in background characters doing little things, and this is no exception. If you pay attention to a lot of scenes, the background characters are always doing something or other that is just funny, cute, or it's just a neat little detail. A lot of studios do not even put that much effort. They just have the characters just doing generic things in the background. This one is like, there's a lot of personality into that. Like when you're in the wedding scene, you have like the King Bob-omb show up, and you see like a Bob-omb basically fanboying over it, while you see like a piranha plant trying to look around and see what he can eat. Just little stuff like that is just incredible touches. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I love how they handle the power-ups in this movie, where they just kind of go like, well, it's exactly the same in the game. They tried, well, not tried, they actually created this whole Bible of sorts behind the scenes to explain like, okay, this is why the blocks are floating and whatnot. And by the time I watched this movie, I was one of those people where before I would kind of question like, okay, how are they going to explain that if they ever do it? By the time I got to this movie, I was like, well, look, it's a fantasy movie in a different world. It floats because that's the world they're in. No need to explain it any further. And I do like that they kind of don't. And I don't think anyone's even bothered by it at this point. Not just because we've gotten accustomed to it through the Mario games, but because it's like, I mean, again, it's a fairy tale. It's a movie where the villain is a turtle who's also a dragon who wants to marry the princess. I don't think we need to question why this stuff happens. I mean, realistically, if there is one major flaw to it, is that the Kong army is kind of an extended cameo, and not so much in terms of, well, okay, them being an extended cameo is not the problem. They set up a reason why they're doing it is because they're trying to get an army. The problem is that the movie spends so much time setting it up, and then they all get captured, and it's really just like, okay, we need someone to pal around with Mario for the last act to basically take down Bowser. And you could have done some narrative stuff to have Luigi be the one that escapes, and he probably convinces Mario like, hey, look, there were some other people in there, they failed to escape, and now we gotta rescue them too. And Mario decides like, okay, let's do that, and add in the whole princess thing to add up the stakes because of the marriage. But on the other hand, Donkey Kong is a really good character, and I do love how they use him in this movie. So that admittedly is another thing that they could have tweaked a little bit just to kind of give a better explanation as to the Kongs being there, or made it so that their capture didn't feel like, okay, it just wasted the entire plot line. I don't think it does entirely, just because it's the typical thing in movies where it's like, oh look, we had an idea and a plan, but that plan failed or backfired. But I do understand people's issues with that, where it's like, yeah, now they feel kind of pointless, so that was just one long dragged out thing. I think you could have maybe added something or other to the Kongs. Like maybe they could have established like, oh, the Mushroom Kingdom's been running low on power-ups or something like that, and they have a stockpile of them, just especially because it perfectly sets up like the whole thing with all the power-ups and the Mario versus Donkey Kong sequence, which is one of the highlights of the movie. But again, I don't know, it doesn't really hurt the movie all that much to me, especially because I'm having such a good time that I just don't get too bothered by it. And that's generally what I feel about this movie. Is like, it's a nice breezy 90 minutes that, yeah, were a lot of better animated movies last year, and yet I still found myself loving this so much that I was like, yeah, you know, I'll fully admit other better movies existed, but I still really enjoyed this one. I was even theorizing, like, you know, thinking about the Oscars earlier, that they could have given this a nomination at the Oscars for Best Animated Film, and I wouldn't have been too mad. I would have been like, okay, yeah, they could have given it to one other movie just because there were some really good movies last year. But for what it's worth, if they had, it would have been nice. Personally, I think this was actually better than one of the nominees. But I'm not here to talk about which one got nominated that I didn't really like. Overall, solid movie, even if you're not a fan of Mario. I do think it's best if you watch it with with children, whether it's your own or babysitting, just because it really is a bedtime story. But if you can get yourself in the mindset of a child, or remind yourself of how a classic Walt Disney movie is, you could probably find the charm in this, even if you're not a fan of the video games. Yes, there's a lot of references, but it never distracts from the story. It's never something that is so in your face that it just ruins the flow of the story, because most of the time it's just like, it's stuff that is in the world. Like, yeah, you know, here's a reference to Cat Mario from Mario 3D World, but again, we've already established like power-ups are a thing in this world, and it is something that gets involved in the story, where it's like, you know, hey, you know, this is how he fights off Donkey Kong. So I don't get bothered by stuff like that. This is a movie that really did do its homework and was well thought out in what it was trying to do and what it was wanting to be. I hope the sequel improves on it, but for what it's worth, this first movie, I think, knocked it out of the park. Maybe not the greatest thing ever, but it is the perfect way to do a movie for this thing, even if, again, it could be better. So with that all out of the way, thank you for listening, and I'll see you again next time.
Guess you're not getting my army.
Thanks for stopping by. Go ahead and follow this channel. Subscribe, like, and comment. Ring the bell for notifications. Go ahead and also follow my podcast. And give some love to my Patreon account while you're at it. It's www.patreon.com/saicams. Again, thanks for stopping by, and I hope you come back for more in the future.